Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Alchemist. Tonight we begin with a candle-lit stroll down a cold, echoing stairwell beneath a castle that probably hasn't hosted a decent party since the 14th century. Stone walls drip quietly, like the castle is politely sweating. Emil, a wiry young apprentice with hair always one spark away from singe, tiptoes past the pantry where last year's apples are quietly committing to vinegar. He's chasing a sound, faint, persistent, and most importantly, not his master snoring. The lantern trembles in his hand, tossing shadows that dance like over-caffeinated ghosts. You probably want to know this. There is no polite way to walk in soft leather boots on a medieval spiral staircase without sounding like you're being judged by the architecture. He flinches at every creak and whisper of draught as he reaches the lowest door, a warped plank crusted with iron. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Emil pushes the door, and it groans like a sleep-deprived ogre. The cellar stretches into a low, vaulted room, lit only by his lantern. Barrels line the walls, and somewhere, water plinks with casual rhythm. In the center sits a circular stone rim, the old well the castle's cook insists is dry as a king's purse. But that's not true. Emil sees a shimmer far below, and catches a chill that travels straight up his spine. He leans over. "Anyone down there?" he whispers, partly to the water and partly to his own curiosity. At first, only the echo of his breath answers, then, plop. A single bubble rises and pops with a soft sigh, and the tiniest ripple makes the lantern's reflection quiver. Medieval wells were lifelines, especially in Highland castles like this, where rivers ran far below the cliffs. Some were sunk through rock with sheer stubbornness and the labor of unlucky peasants. Historians still argue whether the Roman engineers had anything to do with this one, because its lining stones are suspiciously precise, almost smugly neat. Emil traces a finger along the rim and finds tiny marks, triangles and circles, half worn by centuries of anxious hands and spilled water. Then it happens, a hush of movement, a faint syllable, not words yet, just the audible feeling that the water has a secret and is terrible at keeping it. Emil licks his lips, his apprentice brain juggling two impulses. 1. Run like a squirrel caught in daylight. 2. Poke the mystery with a stick until it does tricks. He fetches a small vial from his belt, scoops a little of the water, and sniffs. Nothing remarkable, maybe a hint of iron and moss. He tastes a drop, because medieval apprentices made bold, questionable choices. Cold, metallic, like licking the side of a cathedral bell. Somewhere behind him, a rat makes the sound of something dragging across a sack of grain, and Emil nearly throws the vial at it. That night, he dreams of silver ripples and a faint gurgling laugh. In the dream, the water coils like a snake and whispers his name, Emil. He wakes to the faint pre-dawn hum of the castle, roosters negotiating their shift change, and wonders if he actually heard it in the cellar, or if his imagination is just moonlighting as a horror writer. The next evening, after his master nods off over a book of Galen's remedies, Emil sneaks down again. This time, he brings a chunk of stale bread to test the water's depth. He drops it, ripples spiral outward. Then, a faint two-tone gurgle reaches his ears, rising from the stone throat of the well. So heavy, so light. He freezes. He swears the tones are like two small flutes trying to play a duet without rehearsal. The voices overlap, unintelligible yet intentional. One high, quick, curious. The other slow, drawn out, almost sighing. He swallows and backs away, his brain rattling with the uncomfortable thrill of discovery. Not all wells were just wells, according to the quirkier chronicles of medieval Europe. One 12th century account claimed a monastery's spring in Aquitaine would hum a single note before a storm. Another told of an English moat that sang in Latin when the moon was full, though modern scholars suspect wind in the reeds. Emil didn't know these specifics, but he could feel deep in his adolescent bones that something here was not in the standard plumbing manual. As he clambers back upstairs, heart thudding, he decides not to tell his master yet. The old man once banished a cousin for swearing a pig, spoke to him in Market Square. Instead, Emil tucks the night into his chest, like a contraband candle. In the dark of his loft, he hears the water still echoing behind his ears, a duet just shy of language, like the world's most secret argument warming up. He wonders what on earth two voices could find to debate, trapped in a stone throat beneath a castle, where even spiders take long naps. Whatever it is, he promises himself he'll go back tomorrow night and lean a little closer. The next night, Emil descends the cold spiral again, the lantern swinging from his hand like a nervous pendulum. He has memorized every uneven stone now, every crack in the mortar, every draft that slips around his ankles like a cat testing his nerves. The old door winds open, and the cellar greets him with its familiar scent, damp limestone, musty grain sacks, and the faintest tang of rusted iron. The well sits in the middle, patient, as if it has been waiting centuries for an audience. Emil kneels at the rim, the stone chill biting through his wool trousers. The water is still tonight, black as polished obsidian. He clears his throat and whispers, "Hello?" His voice falls down the shaft like a pebble. Then the first murmur, a gurgle, then a pop. This time, he catches actual syllables, high and bright, bubbly, flighty, quick. A second voice follows, slower, heavier, drawn out like it had to wake up all the molecules first. Settle, always settle. Emil's jaw drops. He's not imagining this. The two tones sound like characters from a bizarre puppet show no one invited him to. He inches closer, listening. The well swallows the lantern light, and in the shimmer of its reflection he swears the ripples are pulsing to the rhythm of the voices. Hydrogen, though Emil doesn't know its name yet, chirps, "Why so slow? I want sky, I want spark." Oxygen sighs, grounded, like stone but necessary. Emil leans so far, he almost topples in. His heart races as he realizes he is eavesdropping on an argument. The idea that the very water beneath the castle is holding a late-night debate is both thrilling and absurd. He pulls out the tiny parchment notebook he keeps for recording measurements of failed elixirs and scribbles down the words as best he can. Flighty, settle, spark. He underlines spark twice. A rat rustles in the corner, and Emil shushes it instinctively. He's utterly hooked. The world above is oblivious. While he crouches there in the cold, history moves at its slow pace. In medieval castles like this, water was often the most fiercely guarded resource. Wells could mean the difference between surviving a siege and waving the white flag. Historians still argue whether this particular castle's well was ever poisoned during the skirmishes 200 years ago. Local gossip says a rival lord once tossed a sheep carcass in to spoil the water, but there's no record anyone drank mutton tea. Emil wonders if the voices have been here all along, whispering through generations while soldiers clanked their armor overhead and cooks fetched buckets. None the wiser, he dips a finger into the water. It's cold enough to bite, but it feels alive like a shy handshake. Why argue? Emil finally whispers, feeling silly but too curious to stop. Hydrogen bubbles. Freedom. I rise. I leave. Oxygen sighs again. Duty. I stay. I bind. He imagines two invisible neighbors stuck in a shared apartment forever, one bouncing off the walls, the other clutching the rent ledger. He nearly laughs, a nervous little puff that echoes off the vault. Something about the way the voices layer over the plinking drips and hollow echoes makes Emil's skin buzz. He backs away and sits cross-legged on the cold floor, just listening. Above him, the castle seems impossibly far. Down here, it's only him, the well, and the restless duet of existence. As his eyelids droop, a thought needles him. Is he the first human to ever notice this? Or did some apprentice centuries ago also crouch here, wide-eyed and trembling, listening to the building blocks of water squabble about their lot in life? By the time his lantern sputters and threatens to die, the voices fade back to murmurs. He promises aloud, "I sit'll come back. I sit'll figure you out." On his way back to the loft, he trips on the last step, skinning his palm. "Ow," he mutters. And then bizarrely he hears a faint echo in his head. Fragile, clumsy, human. He steps half sure the well just roasted him. The next evening, Emil arrives armed with more than a flickering lantern and his nervous curiosity. He drags down a crooked, three-legged stool from the workshop, a leather satchel packed with chalk, a tin whistle, and his favorite glass flask cracked at the lip, but precious because it survived his last 3 accidental explosions. He plunks the stool beside the well, careful not to topple in, and lays his tools out like a knight preparing for battle, though his opponent tonight is boredom and ignorance rather than a spear. The well gurgles before he even says hello. Emil freezes. Then in the stillness he hears it, the sprightly bubble of hydrogen chiding the slow, sonorous hum of oxygen. With it, trapped again. Content, be content. Trapped. I hate trapped. You always want trapped. Emil leans in and whispers, I can hear you. His voice quavers, and the stone walls throw it back at him like a soft reminder. I can hear you. The voices pause, and for the first time, he swears the water ripples into a deliberate circle. Human. He gulps. Yes. Apprentice alchemist. Emil. I study things that fizzle and stink. You probably want to know this. I am extremely underqualified for ghost molecule diplomacy. Hydrogen laughs. A rapid pop-pop, like someone chewing gum. Funny. I like funny. Oxygen hums. Suspicious. Emil scribbles furiously in his notebook, describing the sounds, the reactions, even the way his own breath fogs in the damp air. By candlelight, he experiments. He fills his glass flask with a sample of well water and sets it on the stone beside the lantern. His plan, heat it gently and see if the voices change. He's half expecting a scolding from his absent master if he cracks another flask, but curiosity beats caution tonight. The medieval world above ground doesn't know it yet, but Europe is on the cusp of an alchemical frenzy that will one day blossom into actual chemistry. In Emil's time, people still believe metals have temperaments, lead dreams of becoming gold, and the moon tugs on herbs in mysterious ways. Historians still argue whether court alchemists like his own master ever believed these myths sincerely, or just kept nobles entertained for a living. The flask warms, steam fogging its neck. Emil leans close. The hydrogen voice giggles fast and high. Warm, free, I rise. The oxygen voice rumbles too soon, too soon. A wisp of vapor escapes, curling like a spirit seeking the ceiling. Emil imagines the two components literally peeling away from one another, stretching their invisible arms. He's not entirely wrong, though his understanding is centuries too early. Don't set leave yet, he whispers. I have more questions. Hydrogen titters. Catch me if you can. Emil fumbles for the tin whistle and gives it a shaky tweet. The sound ricochets off the vaulted ceiling. To his astonishment, the water pulses in time, tiny concentric waves answering the note like a nod. Music, sighs oxygen. Heavy music. Dance, dance, squeals. Hydrogen, making the surface pop. He laughs softly, the way someone might at a cat chasing dust in a sunbeam. I didn't think science involved lullabies, he mutters. Hours slip by. Emil tests different pitches, tapping the stone rim with a bit of chalk like a xylophone. He notices that higher notes make the water fizz more, while low hums calm it. He wonders if he's actually influencing the molecules or just hypnotizing himself into believing. Either way, it feels like he's building a secret friendship. At one point he hears something new, a faint third echo, lower than even oxygen, a grumble like rocks grinding under the riverbed. He freezes. Hello? The well is silent for a long heartbeat. Then oxygen sighs, older than stone. Hydrogen whispers, done to wake it. The thought of something even deeper than the elements themselves sends a shiver down Emil's back. He imagines the entire aquifer as a sleeping dragon, and he is a foolish squire poking it with lullabies. He decides not to whistle for a while. When he finally climbs the spiral staircase back to the workshop, dawn is smudging the arrow slits with grey light. He smells like wet limestone and scorched candlewick. He collapses onto his straw mattress and scrawls a final note before sleep claims him. They know I am here. They are, teaching or playing. His last waking thought is that he needs a better whistle, and maybe earplugs in case the dragon grumbles again. Emil wakes well past noon, his hair a haystack halo, his tunic smelling faintly of smoke and moss, sunlight needles through the shutters, stabbing his eyes. He groans and rolls over, muttering to no one. I feel like a butter churn that someone forgot to clean. Yet his hand gropes for the notebook on instinct. He flips to last night's scribbles and winces at his own scrawl. They know I am here, teaching, playing, dragon. Outside, the castle is alive with mundane noise. Hooves clop in the bailey, a cook yells about burned barley, and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer rings through the summer haze. For a moment he wonders if he imagined it all. Hydrogen giggles, oxygen sighs, the third subterranean grumble. Then, from the corner of his room, the cracked flask emits a tiny pop as if winking. "All right," he mumbles, "not a dream." He spends the afternoon preparing. His master is away in the Duke's library, chasing a rumor that the Romans knew how to make self-heating bathwater. Historians still argue whether those hypercaust systems ever worked as smoothly as the stories claim. Emil is left to his own devices, which historically leads to minor fires and one regrettable melted doorknob. This time, he assembles a proper toolkit. A larger glass sphere, polished enough to reflect his wide eyes. A bundle of dried mint to test scents. A small bronze bell from the chapel's broken clock. And for good measure, a pouch of powdered charcoal because he read somewhere that spirits like gifts. Down the spiral stair he goes, counting each step like a heartbeat. The air cools and thickens. The well greets him with a plunk, just one drop falling from above, rippling the black water. "You came back." Oxygen hums, voice like a cello string. "You brought toys," Hydrogen chirps. "Yes," Emil whispers. "And maybe snacks. I wasn't sure what you eat." The water giggles with a soundless shimmer. Light. And air. Sometimes metal. Metal? Emil frowns. Like swords. Small, shiny, hydrogen teasers. Like your bell. He hesitates, then dangles the bell above the surface. A single bubble rises, touches the bronze, and pops. The bell gives a muted ting all on its own. Emil's heart jumps like a startled frog. As he experiments, he remembers a tidbit from an old alchemical scroll. Some scholars believed wells could hear the secrets whispered to them and would respond with blessings or curses. Historians still argue whether these texts were practical guides or just medieval bedtime entertainment for paranoid nobles. Emil, at this exact moment, is inclined to believe both. He sprinkles a pinch of charcoal powder onto the water. It floats like black snowflakes, then slowly sinks. The voices murmur. "Shadows taste funny." Carbon kisses. He laughs softly. "I sit them feeding ghosts," he says. "My master would be thrilled, or horrified. Probably both." Then the third voice stirs again, low, rumbling, a sound that seems to vibrate in his teeth. Old memory stone remembers. Hydrogen hisses. "Shh, you sid'll scare him away." Emil trembles but forces a joke. Too late. My knees are already running away without me. The rumble fades, leaving only the playful bubbling. He exhales slowly, realizing his knuckles have gone white around the glass sphere. He decides to try something bold, lowering the sphere into the water with a rope. It fills with the well sips, inky liquid. He caps it quickly, listening for any reaction. The voices fall silent. Then, "Copy twin, we are two now." He nearly drops the sphere, dizzy with the idea that he is holding a fragment of a sentient conversation. He swirls it gently. The faintest fizz hums in his palm. Suddenly, he imagines the castle above him. The Duke dining, soldiers sharpening spears, utterly unaware that beneath their feet, molecules argue like siblings. He wonders how many other wells in the world are secretly alive. A quirky thought crosses his mind. Maybe the Thames in London gossips about the sailors who bathe in it. Maybe Venice's canals hum lullabies to sleeping gondolas. He sets the sphere down, exhausted but exhilarated. Before climbing back up, he does something impulsive. He whispers his own secret to the well. "I stump scared of failing," he confesses. "I want to make gold, or at least not blow up the kitchen again. And I think I like talking to you more than talking to people." A pause, then Oxygen murmurs. We like your fear tastes honest. Hydrogen burbles, we like you. The stone staircase feels lighter under his feet as he ascends. For the first time in his young life, Emil senses that his bumbling curiosity might actually matter, not to kings or guilds but to the unseen world gurgling beneath the castle. By the next evening, the castle is drenched in that deep violet light that makes stone look almost soft. Emil carries his glass sphere, now full of well water like a holy relic. He has tucked it in a padded satchel, wrapped in the sleeve of an old tunic, because the thought of it cracking on the stairs gives him goosebumps. He also brings bread crusts, his logic being that if spirits can taste carbon, maybe they'd enjoy toast too. He slips past the kitchens, where a cook is muttering about weevils in the flour, and down the spiral steps to the cool underbelly of the castle. The torches here never quite drive away the shadows. They seem to breed in corners, whispering in languages only mice understand. Emil whispers, "Evening," into the chill. The well answers at once. Little sun returns. Oxygen's voice vibrates low, and smells like breakfast. Hydrogen squeaks, clearly noticing the bread. Emil settles on the damp stones, arranging his tools, the sphere, the bread, a stub of chalk, and the small bronze bell. He draws a quick symbol on the floor, an open circle with a dot in the center, because he once read that medieval stargazers believed circles would trap wandering spirits, like cosmic mouse traps. Historians still argue whether that practice was astronomy or just bored monks doodling in candle smoke. Tonight, Emil says softly, "I want to understand why you talk, why you even exist like this." He pauses, then adds, "And also, I brought snacks." He breaks the bread and tosses a chunk into the water. The splash is small, but the reaction is immediate. Warm, soft murmurs oxygen. Crunch later, jiggles hydrogen. Crumb sinks. Memory wakes. The third voice grumbles from deep stone. Emil shivers at that last part. He leans over and peers into the well. For a heartbeat, he swears he sees faint rings of light radiating outward, as if the stone itself were humming with some buried pulse. He mutters, "All right, so bread counts as a bell ringer. Good to know." He spends the next hour testing reactions, tapping the bell, swirling the sphere, even whispering words like gold, fire, and storm, just to see if the water responds. It does, in tiny but undeniable ways. Bubbles form after certain words. Other times, a strange metallic hum vibrates through the rope of the bucket. Emil scribbles furiously, imagining himself as a proper chronicler for some secret society. Then he remembers a quirky historical tidbit he read in a crumbling margin note. During the 13th century, an eccentric French alchemist supposedly claimed he could hear the planet Mercury arguing with itself in a silver bowl. Historians still debate whether he was hallucinating from mercury fumes or simply ahead of his time. Emil can't help but grin. Perhaps he is following in that lunatic's footsteps. Halfway through his experiments, the castle above suddenly erupts in muffled clamour. Boots on stone, a distant trumpet, dogs barking. Emil freezes. "Uh-oh," he whispers to the well. "Something sep's happening." The well responds with its usual lack of comfort. Horses smell sharp, iron teeth coming. Hydrogen hisses, "Don't sit, leave us." Emil's heart skips. He blows out his lamp to avoid drawing attention through the stairwell. In the dimness, he feels the castle trembling slightly, as if reacting to many heavy feet. Perhaps the Duke's guard is drilling late, or maybe someone of rank has arrived unexpectedly. Either way, Emil realizes he is now part of two worlds, the noisy, armored life above, and the murmuring, slippery life below. The ruckus fades after a quarter hour. Emil dares to relight his lamp and continue. "So," he says nervously, "I guess that's Sip's life up there. I prefer your company. People up there shout too much. People dry," Oxygen muses. "People pop," Hydrogen adds, which makes Emil laugh in spite of himself. The deep stone voice rumbles once more, slowly, as though surfacing from centuries of silence. Soon gate opens. Water remembers the sky. Emil leans closer. "Gate? What gate?" No reply, only the drip of water somewhere unseen. and the faint shimmer of his own reflection staring back up with wide, anxious eyes. As he climbs back to his chamber, the night air above seems too thin, too plain. The stars blink indifferently, and the wind tastes of hay and smoke. He thinks about the bread sinking into blackness, about stone that remembers, and about gates that might open to sky or sea or some alchemical in between. In bed he tries to sleep, but every creak of timber reminds him of the muffled commotion earlier. He pictures armored men chasing shadows, while below, molecules whisper ancient plans. He realizes with a sleepy grin that he has become the strangest kind of double agent, apprentice above ground, secret conversationalist below. And just before his eyes finally drift closed, he hears, faintly in memory, the bronze bell's lone note, like the well itself is telling him, "Come back soon." The next dawn drapes the castle in a faint mist, softening its jagged silhouette. Emil wakes to the dull ache of interrupted sleep, and the lingering echo of voices that don't belong in dreams. He stretches on his straw mattress, listening to the shuffle of servants in the hallway and the distant clang of a blacksmith at the outer wall. He decides, perhaps against better judgment, that today he will bring something new to the well. If bread stirred murmurs and bubbles, what might music do? After all, he'd once overheard a troubadour swear that the stones in Chartres Cathedral vibrated like fat bees when he plucked his lute in certain corners. Historians still argue whether this was mystical resonance or just enthusiastic acoustics. Emil spends the morning in the dusty workshop, coaxing a crude flute out of a hollowed reed. His master, oblivious to the nightly experiments, hunches over a brazier, muttering about lead that refuses to transmute. At one point, the older alchemist snaps, "Fetch me more quicksilver and stop humming like a monk with a headache." "Yes, master," Emil says, pocketing the reed flute and quietly promising the well a concert. He waits until twilight again, when the torches flicker like candlelit secrets along the stairwell. The castle above is calmer tonight. No boot thunder, no alarm, only the mild smell of roasted onions drifting down as Emil descends, flute and a fresh scrap of cheese in hand. At the well-sept's edge, the air is cooler than ever, almost metallic on the tongue. Emil clears his throat. "Evening, friends. I thought we try music." He sits cross-legged on the damp stone, lifts the reed flute, and plays a wobbly tune that loosely resembles a market-day jig. The first notes bounce off the stone walls like startled pigeons. Long breath. Oxygen murmurs after a pause. Funny whistle. Hydrogen titters. From the stone depths, song of river but crooked. Encouraged, Emil keeps playing, sliding into a slower, almost lullaby-like sequence. He imagines the water's surface rippling with invisible applause. As he plays, he feels the vibrations in his chest, faint but insistent, as if the castle itself is humming back. Halfway through his improvisation, something peculiar happens. The water begins to glow faintly. It isn't bright, more like moonlight caught under the surface, but it makes Emil's breath hitch. He lowers the flute. Warm now, oxygen purrs. Dance, dance, dance. Hydrogen squeals. A series of delicate bubbles rise and pop, leaving tiny rings. Emil whispers, "Are you alive? I mean, like, really alive?" No direct answer. Instead, the deep stone voice rumbles with patience older than any courtly archive. Life is water. Water is gate. Gate needs key. Emil leans closer. A key? Do you mean a literal key, or some alchemical thing? "Key is rhythm," comes the reply, almost lost in a splash. A shiver races down Emil's spine. He recalls a quirky tidbit his master once shared. Some medieval alchemists believed certain notes, played or sung, could unlock the stars or shake secrets out of metals. Historians still debate whether this notion was symbolic or a primitive grasp at resonance physics. Maybe, Emil thinks, he just stumbled into that very experiment. He decides to test the theory. He alternates between high and low notes, varying tempo, tapping his heels softly on the stones. The water responds with intermittent sparkles and faint mist. At one point, Emil swears he hears a chorus of soft sighs, like multiple molecules exhaling in unison. He laughs quietly. "You're all terrible dancers, but I adore you anyway." Then he unwraps the cheese, and with ceremonial flair, lets a small cube plop into the darkness. Sharp taste, old grass, Oxygen says thoughtfully. Sticky joy, Hydrogen adds, delighted. Time blurs, Emil plays, listens, experiments. The castle above might as well be another continent. Down here, it's only damp air, soft echoes, and the pulse of liquid curiosity. When he finally decides to leave, his reed flute is wet from his own breath and the occasional drip from the ceiling. He tucks it in his satchel like a relic. As he ascends the stairs, he imagines his master poring over lead and salt, never suspecting that the real transformation is happening below, not in the crucibles. Emil pauses near the top, listening to the wind slip through arrow slits. It feels like the well's whispers have followed him, curling around his ears in ghostly camaraderie. In bed, exhaustion drapes over him. He notices that the castle no longer feels entirely made of stone and wood. It feels alive, threaded with subterranean veins that pulse in rhythm with his clumsy flute. He drifts into sleep, wondering what other keys the well might demand, and whether he has already begun unlocking a door no one else knows exists. The next morning, Emil awakens to the chirp of sparrows perched outside the narrow arrow slit that serves as his window. Sunlight barely filters in, touching the straw at an angle that turns every wisp of hay into a needle of gold. He stretches and winces at the ache in his arms, a souvenir from holding the flute for hours in that damp stairwell. His mind, however, is anything but groggy. He remembers the luminous ripples, the musical experiment, and most vividly, the well's cryptic phrase, "Key is rhythm." He spends the early hours of the day hauling buckets for the cook and sweeping the stone corridors, doing his best to look like a dutiful apprentice. The master alchemist glares over his latest crucible as Emil shuffles past. "I heard whistling last night," the old man mutters, adjusting the bellows. "If the guards catch you wandering, I'll have to transmute you into a broom to justify keeping you around." "Yes, master," Emil says softly, biting back a grin. He considers mentioning the strange luminescence and the talking molecules, but he knows the old man would either laugh or lock him in the workshop for fumes-induced detox. After all, scholars still argue whether medieval alchemists truly believed in spirits within wells, or whether those tales were just poetic metaphors for minerals and echoes. Emil is starting to believe the spirits are very, very real. When afternoon breaks, Emil wanders into the small castle library, a dusty nook that smells of leather and lavender. He combs through scrolls about water, wells, and mystical gates. One cracked parchment claims that the element of water binds all memory and the stones remember the first flood. He chuckles at the melodrama, but his stomach flips as he recalls the voice from the depths whispering about life and gates. On another shelf, he discovers a small codex about medieval instruments. A margin note describes how minstrels sometimes played flutes or rebecks at town fountains to wake the sleeping flow. Historians still debate whether this was symbolic or part of some secret guild ritual. Emil traces the inked drawing of a man piping into a well and thinks, so maybe I'm not completely insane. Night falls, and he returns to the well with a plan: create a more deliberate rhythm. His Seps brought the reed flute again, but also a small wooden spoon to tap on the stone rim. He greets the voices softly. "Hello again, you bubble-headed philosophers. Tonight, we drum." Soft child returns, the deep stone voice acknowledges. Funny pipe boy, Hydrogen giggles. He smells of candle wax. Oxygen sniffs. Emil laughs under his breath. He begins with a simple beat, tap, 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 letting the rhythm echo down the cylindrical shaft. Then he plays 2 short notes between the taps, forming a wobbly little song. The water stirs. Mist unfurls like silk threads from the well, and faint motes of blue-green light flicker in the dark. "All right, let's see if we can find that key." Hamel murmurs, sinking the flute and tapping into something that feels instinctive rather than learned. The vibrations seem to hum up through the soles of his boots. He imagines he's the hinge of a massive invisible door. The response is immediate. The water pulses once, twice, and a single clear droplet rises from the surface, hovering, shimmering like liquid glass, before falling back with a plink. Emil gasps, nearly dropping the flute. Door listens, the stone voice rumbles. Tickle again. Hydrogen squeals. Warm in the veins, oxygen sighs. Encouraged, Emil continues. He shifts the rhythm into a slow lull, the musical equivalent of a heartbeat. His imagination paints a picture of some ancient mechanism deep below, vast gears made of mineral and memory, slowly stirring awake. His master would call it delusion. Emil calls it the first step of an adventure. Another drop levitates, lingers longer, then splits in two. Emil feels a pang of both joy and unease. He has no idea what he's opening, or if it should be opened, but curiosity is a stronger chain than fear. Before leaving, he whispers, "I said I'll find more songs, more rhythms, maybe even bring a drum. Bring heartbeat wood," the stone voice instructs softly. Loud fun, hydrogen chirps. Careful, water remembers. Oxygen trails off like a sigh. As Emil climbs the spiral stair, the damp echoes of his own footsteps mingle with the faint drip of the well. He realizes that the castle above, its soldiers, courtiers, and cooks, knows nothing of this secret symphony below their boots. He feels a strange sense of ownership, as if the well has chosen him alone. He slips into his straw bed near midnight, thoughts racing. He wonders if ancient builders of the castle knew what they were sitting on. Historians might argue for centuries about foundations and fortifications, but no archive ever mentioned a singing, glowing well that demanded rhythm as a key. Emil smiles to himself as sleep finally drapes him like a warm, forgiving cloak. The following morning, a mist clings to the castle courtyard, curling around the bases of the worn statues like a cat around familiar ankle. Emil wakes with straw marks on his cheek and a tingling excitement in his chest, because today he has a mission. He needs a drum, or at least something that can mimic one. Medieval alchemists, he reminds himself, didn't usually carry percussion instruments, and his master would not approve of unnecessary jingling. He slips into the kitchen first, where the cook is wrestling with a stubborn loaf. "Need a pot," Emil says, as casually as he can manage. "What for?" The cook grunts, elbow deep in dough. "An acoustics experiment." The cook squints, clearly debating whether to throw him out. Instead, she shrugs and hands him a shallow copper pot. Emil promises to return it and scurries away, heart pounding like he's already playing the instrument. In the outer bailey, he tests his new drum. A gentle tap rings with a metallic hum, resonating through the chilly morning air. He adds a rhythm with his fingers, imagining the echo down the well shaft. It's not perfect, but he hopes the watery voices aren't critics. Historians still argue whether medieval castles had intentional sound traps to carry music, or if it was just an architectural accident. Emil silently votes for built-in magic amplifiers. He waits for nightfall, doing his chores with exaggerated efficiency to avoid suspicion. The master alchemist notices his energy. "You search are either up to something," the old man says, "or finally learning that mortar doesn't grind itself." He sprinkles a pinch of powdered cinnabar into a simmering concoction. "Do you even know why we use this?" "It makes the red pigment for philosophers' seals," Emil ventures, trying to sound attentive. "Correct," the master says, wagging a finger. "And if you breathe it in, you still see more than seals. Maybe that's sips wrong with you." Emil swallows a guilty laugh. He thinks about telling the master that last night he made water droplets levitate with a drum beat, but he doubts it would count as valid alchemy. Finally, the courtyard empties. The moon rises like a pale coin flicked into the sky. Emil descends the spiral stairs again, copper pot under one arm and a small wooden mallet in hand. The air cools with each step, and a faint drip echoes from below. "Evening," he whispers as he nears the well. "I brought heartbeat wood." "Child of taps," the stone voice acknowledges, deep and slow. "Metal belly friend," hydrogen chirps. "Resonance will wake the veins," oxygen murmurs. He sets the pot on the rim and begins to play, a gentle repeating rhythm like a sleeping heart lulled by dreams. He taps with the mallet, then with his fingers, layering soft and hard beats. The sound bounces down the shaft, returning as a ghost of itself. The response is immediate. The water glows faintly blue, then green. A mist rises in delicate swirls, hugging the inside of the shaft before spilling into the stairwell. Emil holds his breath, awe replacing fear. He notices shapes forming in the mist. A ring, a wave, a faint outline like a door with no wall. Gate hums. The stone voice rumbles. Tickle again, tickle again. Hydrogen squeals. Remember to pause, oxygen warns. Breathy and elongated. Emil experiments, changing the rhythm, fast, then slow, then syncopated like the rain on the castle roof. The levitating droplets return, now 3 at a time, orbiting one another in a lazy spiral. For a moment, Emil wonders if he's conducting the first symphony the world's ever heard for an audience of 2 molecules and an ancient stone. Then something extraordinary happens. A soft pulse shivers through the stairwell, and the mist briefly coalesces into a watery mirror. Emil sees the reflection of the castle, but older, with higher towers and banners of a design he doesn't recognize. He blinks, and the image scatters like startled birds. He nearly drops the pot. "Okay," he whispers, "so you can show the past." Water remembers, oxygen echoes, as if proud. Stone's too slow, but watch, the stone voice adds. Play more, hydrogen begs, effervescent as ever. Emil complies, but carefully. His pulse thuds in time with the beat, and he feels the edges of exhaustion pressing in. He recalls a line from a scroll he skimmed earlier. Some gates open inward, some outward, and some are better left closed. Historians still debate whether that passage described literal portals or the doors of perception, as one dreamy monk called them. Emil isn't sure he wants to find out which. After several minutes, he slows his rhythm to a whispering tap. The mist folds back into the well like a soft curtain, and the glow dims. A single drop rises, lingers at eye level, then splashes back down in a tiny farewell. Child of rhythm, the stone voice says, almost warm. Fun night, bubble sleep, zers, hydrogen yawns. Be wary, next beat may open more, oxygen trails off. Emil wipes sweat from his brow, suddenly aware of how cold the stones feel against his knees. He packs the pot and mallet under his arm and ascends the stair, feeling both victorious and humbled. Above, the castle snores in blissful ignorance. He crawls into bed with the sensation that he's balancing on the edge of something vast and secret, like a cat perched above a canyon. Sleep steals him swiftly, and in his dreams the droplets rise like tiny lanterns, leading him deeper into the well's memory. Morning sunlight bleeds through the small arrow slit in Emil's attic room, painting a pale bar across his blanket. He blinks, groggy, and reluctant to return to reality, because in his dream the droplets had danced in spirals, forming a constellation that whispered his name. When he finally sits up, the memory of the mist door and the old castle's reflection hums in his chest like a secret melody. Down in the workshop, the master alchemist is already at work. A pungent smell of vinegar and metal greets Emil, making his nose wrinkle. "You," the old man barks without looking up, "will spend the morning scrubbing alembics. One of our noble visitors dropped a goose feather into the retort yesterday, and I can still smell roasted poultry." "Yes, master," Emil says, obediently rolling up his sleeves. His hands, sore from drumming, ache under the weight of the glass vessels. He scrubs in small circles, watching the distorted reflection of his own face ripple across the wet surfaces. The memory of last night's misty mirror resurfaces, and he wonders were those distortions in the water only reflections, or was the well showing him the actual past? Historians still argue whether reflective scrying in medieval times was mere superstition or a form of cognitive trickery induced by fatigue and flickering light. Emil, half convinced by last night's events, leans toward the extraordinary explanation. Later that day, he's sent to the herb garden to fetch hyssop and marjoram. The castle garden is walled and narrow, with dew clinging to the leaves like glass beads. While cutting a sprig, he notices the gardener, old Mirek, eyeing him. "You've been restless at night," Mirek says, his voice rasping like a rake on gravel. "I see a shadow going toward the well stairs." Emil freezes, shears in hand. "Just clearing the drains," he mumbles. "The rain, you know." Merrick squints, unconvinced. Then he leans closer. "They say that well remembers things it shouldn't. My grandfather swore he saw knights walking in the water long after they were buried." Historians still argue whether this place ever had that many knights, but old stones don't care for ledgers. Emil swallows, nodding. The thought that his secret might already be half known makes him both nervous and oddly excited. He takes the herbs back to the workshop, careful to avoid eye contact with anyone. When night falls, the castle sinks into its habitual hush. Emil waits until the last torch in the inner bailey gutters low, then descends again with his copper pot and mallet. Tonight he feels more deliberate. He wants to test if the well can show the future, or at least more of the past. He greets his companions softly. Evening, voices. It sips me again. Child of steps returns. The stone voice intones. Bubble buddy? Hydrogen squeaks, clearly delighted. Tread lightly, water dreams deep tonight. Oxygen whispers. Emil sets the pot on the rim and begins a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat after a long climb. The echoes seem richer tonight, bouncing up and down the shaft as if two staircases of sound now exist in parallel. The water responds almost instantly, forming ripples that converge toward the center and lift a single droplet into the air. He watches it hover, catching a reflection of the moon from the distant sky above. Then, a strange phenomenon unfolds. The mist gathers not as a mirror, but as a corridor, a watery hallway leading down into darkness. Emil leans forward, his reflection stretching in its walls. He hears faint noises, clashing metal, the soft thud of boots, and a woman laughing. The sound is crisp, as though someone's holding a seashell to his ear. Water keeps voices, memories too heavy to float away. Oxygen murmurs. Emil's heart stutters. He sees a knight, tall and faceless, crossing the corridor of mist with a banner that bears 3 stars. He doesn't recognize the emblem. The knight stops, raises his gauntlet, and seems to point straight at Emil. A chill prickles his neck. Play careful, the stone voice warns. Too loud, door opens, too wide. Oxygen adds. Do it! Loud! Fun! Hydrogen urges, irrepressible. Emil hesitates, then changes the rhythm. Softer now, like raindrops on linen. The corridor fades, the night dissolves into mist, and the water returns to its usual soft glow. He exhales in relief. As he climbs the spiral stairs back to his room, Emil wonders if he has touched a thread connecting centuries. Some scholars today might claim this is a form of hypnagogic hallucination, a medieval alchemist's brain interpreting the play of light and sound as meaningful images. But then again, those scholars weren't hearing oxygen whisper in complete sentences. Upstairs, he sits at his little desk and writes in his secret journal. The well remembers. I think it tried to speak through pictures. Maybe history is waterlogged. Maybe I'm just finally listening. A single droplet, still clinging to his sleeve, slides down and lands on the page, smudging the word listening. He takes it as a sign the well is always paying attention. That night, sleep takes him like a velvet curtain, dropping. He dreams of walking down the mist corridor without fear, following the night to a door made of water. Behind it, the entire castle hums as if submerged in a vast, invisible sea. A gentle voice, neither hydrogen nor oxygen, whispers, soon. The next evening falls heavy with drizzle, and Emil trudges along the inner wall walk, the wet stones reflecting torchlight in wobbly streaks. He feels the castle listening. Its gutters drip like ticking clocks, and the moat exhales a damp, earthy smell. Tonight, he carries not a pot or mallet, but a small vial of honeyed water and a piece of chalk. His plan, half-baked, is to see if the well responds to offerings or symbols, like in the old tales he once overheard in the village tavern. He slips down the spiral stairs, the stones slick under his fingers. At the bottom, the well yawns like a silent throat. A faint mist lingers, curling as if expecting him. Emil kneels and draws a crooked circle on the floor with chalk, enclosing a tiny alchemical sigil he half remembers from his master's dusty grimoire. Historians still argue whether such sigils were mnemonic tools or genuine attempts to call invisible forces, but Emil just hopes the well likes geometry. Evening, he whispers, voice trembling despite his effort to sound casual. I brought, a treat? Child brings sugar, the stone voice rumbles, amused. Bubbly snack. Mine first. Hydrogen chirps with glee. Sweetness sinks slow, careful, It calls other mouths. Oxygen's tone drops soft but uneasy. Emil unstoppers the vial and lets a single drop fall. The honeyed water spirals downward, and the surface reacts immediately. Ripples form concentric rings, glimmering faintly in the torchlight. He leans over and sees his reflection blur, and then twist into something else. A tiled hall, lit by braziers, with armored men lounging as if waiting for orders. He smells smoke and hears the faint clink of goblets. Suddenly, the sound of rain dripping through the shaft joins the vision, layering into an eerie rhythm. Emil taps the stone rim with his fingernail, tentative but curious. The droplets' chorus answers him, a soft ping-ponging of echoes. Then, without warning, a woman's voice sings from deep in the well, not the whisper of oxygen or the squeal of hydrogen, but a resonant alto humming an old folk lullaby. He freezes, the hairs on his arms stiffening. He recognizes the tune. His mother used to sing it while grinding barley in their cottage. "Ah, are you real?" he whispers, his voice wobbling. Memory or echo line is thin. Oxygen offers, like a librarian murmuring across centuries. "Real enough to scare you? Hee hee." Hydrogen teasers, voice bouncing like bubbles in boiling syrup. The stone voice just mutters. Doors shift, be polite. Emil cups his hand to his ear. The song drifts away, replaced by a distant clatter of armor. Then silence. He exhales shakily, realizing he has leaned so far over the edge that his hair almost dips into the well. A fringe historical tidbit drifts into his mind. Some medieval wells doubled as message tubes in sieges, letting whispers travel down to the water to warn or taunt. Historians still debate whether that was ever practical, but Emil now believes any whisper could travel far in this shaft, perhaps even to the past. He takes the chalk again and adds a small star beside his first circle, as if signing a pact. Then he sits cross-legged on the cold floor, letting the drip, drip, drip of the castle seep into his bones. Minutes pass in heavy, damp quiet. Then, almost imperceptibly, the well's mist curls toward him like a sniffing animal. Child listens better now. Oxygen murmurs, approval woven in the sigh. Ask something fun. Hydrogen yelps. Emil licks his lips, suddenly aware of how dry his mouth is. Show me who the knight was. The one with 3 stars on his banner. His voice echoes down the shaft like a pebble rolling away. The surface trembles, and once again the mist swirls into an image. This time, the knight kneels before a woman wearing a crown set with 3 pearls, her face pale but kind. Behind them, the hall is flooded with candlelight, and tapestries flutter in an invisible wind. Emil leans closer, hypnotized. Then, slap, a fat raindrop hits his neck, jolting him back. He realizes the torches above are sputtering. The drizzle has thickened into rain. He quickly corks the vial and wipes the chalk with his sleeve, leaving the stone bare again. He remembers Merrick's warning. The well keeps what it shouldn't. Perhaps leaving sigils here overnight is a poor idea. As he hurries up the stairs, footsteps echo behind him. He spins, heart in his throat, but sees only water running down the steps. Paranoia chases him all the way to his attic. That night, he lies awake, rain drumming the roof. He replays the humming voice and the glimpse of the crowned woman. Somewhere in the castle's lineage, that queen must have existed. Some modern historians suggest that small border castles occasionally sheltered noble widows during succession disputes. Maybe she was one of those shadows. Emil drifts towards sleep, journal clutched to his chest. In his half-dream, droplets float above his bed like tiny lanterns, and hydrogen giggles while oxygen hushes it to silence. Outside, the rain feeds the well, and the whispers deepen, as if the castle itself is inhaling. The morning after the rain, the castle smells of wet stone and old iron. Emil pads through the lower corridor, boots squeaking against damp flagstones. He is half dizzy from staying up late and dreaming of floating droplets, yet curiosity keeps tugging him forward. Today he wants to explore the archives tucked behind the chapel, a place where he might find the faces from his watery visions. His master once said, with a dismissive snort, that dusty records were just fodder for bored clerks. But Emil now suspects the well has been feeding him actual history. He slips past the chapel door, the scent of beeswax and wet wool greeting him. Behind the altar, a narrow stair curls into a cramped archive where scrolls and worm-eaten codices sit in rows like silent jurors. Emil lights a stubby candle and carefully pulls a ledger off the shelf. Inside are lists of castle garrisons with notes about heraldry, tiny sketches of shields and banners. He gasps quietly. A 3-star pattern appears in the margin, drawn in careful ink, attached to the name Sir Theobald of Rhyn. The name feels heavy with age. Emil runs his finger along the faded ink, trying to imagine the knight's voice, his boots clanging on these very stones. Then a quirk of the record catches his eye, a notation in the margin that reads, "Departed in haste during the night of the whistling flood." He shivers. That is not an event he has ever heard of. Historians still argue whether floods in small medieval castles referred to actual water breaches or metaphorical disasters, like the spilling of secrets or a mass desertion. As he kneels among the scrolls, a drop of water falls onto the page. Emil glances up, expecting to see a leak in the ceiling, but the stone is dry. Another drop lands on the back of his hand, perfectly round. He stares as it quivers, then evaporates in the candle's heat, leaving a faint mist behind. Hydrogen's giggle seems to tinkle right inside his ear. Archive smells like socks. Let 6 go back to the fun hole. Oxygen responds with a soft sigh. Patience. Child is following threads. The whisper doesn't echo through the room. It seems to sit right in his head, like thoughts borrowed from the water. Emil swallows and closes the ledger, tucking the knight's name into his memory. Outside the chapel, he notices the castle's inner bailey bustling despite the drizzle. Servants shovel mud, dogs bark at puddles, and Merrick shouts instructions about securing grain stores. Emil approaches the well's vicinity, pretending to carry firewood, and pauses to watch water overflow slightly into the stone channel. The rain from last night has filled it to the brim, and the surface trembles under each gust of wind. A fleeting historical fact comes to mind in many European strongholds. Wells were lined with lead sheets to prevent contamination. Lead poisoning, of course, was a silent hazard. Some scholars debate whether the frequent headaches of medieval garrisons were more about poor ventilation or sipping from toxic plumbing. Emil eyes the well with new suspicion. Maybe the voices are a side effect of ancient choices, or maybe he's simply bonded with the castle's watery memory. He crouches, lowering a fingertip to the slick rim. "Sir Theobald," he whispers, "what did you flee from?" His reflection jitters with the wind. A faint sound rises from the depths, not a giggle or sigh, but the groan of distant chains. He freezes, gripping the rim. Old weight moves. Careful now. Oxygen murmurs like a worried aunt. "Yes, yes," shake the toy chest. Hydrogen squeals. The surface blurs into an image again, torchlight flickering on panicked men. Water floods the hall, ankle deep, carrying bits of straw and a floating goblet. Emil feels cold just watching. Sir Theobald clutches a small coffer and shouts at a companion to run. In the reflection's background, a tapestry flails in the water's surge, and a goat bleats in terror. The scene swirls, then collapses into ripples. Emil gasps and jerks back. The wind carries the smell of moss and wet earth, and for a moment he swears he hears bleating echo in the courtyard. He recalls an odd historical tidbit. Some castles indeed kept livestock indoors during sieges, leaving behind layers of evidence in the floors that archaeologists still uncover. Historians still argue whether that was considered practical or simply desperate, but Emil now has visual confirmation courtesy of his haunted well. That night, he lies in bed, journal open. He sketches a goat, 3 stars, and a chest half submerged in wavy lines. His pen scratches quietly in the candlelight. He muses that water itself is a historian, stubborn and patient, carving memories into stone while people scurry and forget. Somewhere beneath him the well dreams. He almost hears hydrogen giggling itself to sleep, and oxygen humming a lullaby made of long exhalations. Emil's eyes drift shut as a soft drizzle starts again outside, feeding the whispering throat of the castle, inviting him to listen closer tomorrow. Morning sun creeps through arrow slits, painting the alchemy chamber with golden ladders of light. Emil yawns, rubbing a streak of dried ink from his cheek, and listens to the quiet drip of condensation into a bucket below the window. every surface smell of damp parchment and faint vinegar. He stirs a cooled crucible lazily, still thinking Sir Theobald's watery escape. The memory of that goat floating across his vision feels so absurd, and yet it lingers like the aftertaste of bitter herbs. The alchemist's master, grimly cheerful after a mug of watered ale, stomps into the workshop. "Our castle smells like wet dog," he mutters, squinting at Emil's smudged drawings. "And you, my boy, look like the wet dog's scribe." Emil offers a shy grin, hiding the page with the floating chest. He does not yet trust his master with the truth of the well. The man might scoff or worse, take over the discovery entirely. Instead, Emil focuses on the day's assignment, distilling a batch of rosemary essence. The fire crackles beneath the copper still, and fragrant steam curls toward the ceiling. A mundane task like this usually soothes Emil, but today his thoughts are heavy. He recalls a mainstream historical fact he once overheard from traveling monks in many medieval households. Rosemary hung above doorways as both disinfectant and ward against evil spirits. Some early medical texts even suggested steeping it in wine to cleanse foul vapors from the air. Emil glances at the simmering coil and smirks. If ghosts come for him, at least they will leave smelling delightful. By midday he slips away to the courtyard, drawn toward the well like a moth to a lantern. Rainwater has calmed into a glassy surface, reflecting the cloud-dotted sky. He crouches on the worn stones, feeling the warmth of sun seep through his trousers. Slowly he leans over the rim and whispers, "I know about Theobald." A long pause stretches, then a bubble rises, popping silently. Bold? Ha! He was anything but. Hydrogen titters. Child seeks deeper, but deeper is heavier. Oxygen's murmur slides like a slow current. Emil feels the pull of curiosity tighten. He dares to imagine climbing down the rope that hangs for bucket hauling. His pulse thuds in his ears as he remembers stories of medieval well cleaners, usually young boys or nimble men lowered to scrape silt. Quirky tidbit: some were paid in pies because coinage wasn't always handy in rural keeps. He wonders briefly if anyone was ever lowered in this very well, and came back whispering of arguing elements. The reflection trembles and opens again. Emil leans closer, holding his breath. He sees a spiral staircase descending into torchlit gloom. Water trickles along the steps, and a shadow of a coffer bob below. His heart flutters as if he is half falling into the vision. He smells wet iron, and hears the faint clank of a dropped chain. Historians still argue whether secret subchambers beneath castle wells were practical or legend. Some records insist on hidden storage rooms for treasure or escape passages, while skeptics claim it was architectural fantasy. Emil now knows the truth lies in rippling, liquid memory. The castle beneath his knees hides a space like a swallowed breath. That evening, he makes an excuse to Merrick about fetching fresh water for experiments. He lowers the bucket slowly, watching sunlight fade from the courtyard. When the rope reaches the surface, he lingers, letting his fingers brush the wet hemp. A dizzy thrill blooms in his chest. He considers that no YouTube safety video would approve of his plan. Modern common sense would call him reckless, but the whisper of water keeps inviting him. Hydrogen bubbles up with gleeful urgency. Come on, make it a splashy night. Oxygen sighs, ensure breath. Ensure rope, child is not fish. Emil chuckles under his breath, whispering, "I'll be careful," though he doubts the elements demand literal safety. He retreats for tonight, promising himself that tomorrow he will test how far the rope goes. Before sleep, Emil writes another journal entry. He sketches a spiral stair, a chest, and the sunken archways of his imagination. The castle outside creaks as wind presses against its old bones. Somewhere deep in the walls, he hears the muffled echo of moving water. His final thought before drifting off is simple. The well is not just a source of drinking water. It is a memory engine, spinning history into whispers and daring him to listen closer. The room grows still, and his candle gutters out, leaving only the sound of distant drips, like the castle itself is counting down to the next secret he will uncover. Emil woke before dawn, the chill in the alchemy chamber curling around his ankles like a mischievous cat. His blanket slipped to the floor, and he reached for the journal he had fallen asleep over. Its pages were wavy from the night's dampness. He squinted at his drawings. The spiral staircase seemed to almost spin in the dim light, as if the ink wanted to pull him into the well without waiting for permission. A soft drip echoed from the courtyard. The sound alone made his heart skip. Merrick was snoring in the adjoining room, his snores irregular and sputtering, like a pair of bellows on the verge of breaking. Emil grinned at the domestic absurdity of it. The boy decided he would make his move now, while the master dreamed of roasted goose or maybe just free grain. He grabbed the rough hemp rope from the wall, feeling the coarse fibers scrape his palm, and tiptoed past the small shelf of drying herbs. A sprig of sage brushed his ear like a whispered, "Good luck." In the courtyard, the air smelled of moss and old iron. A low fog clung to the stones, muffling his footsteps. He knelt by the well and breathed slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the liquid darkness. He returns. Oxygen hummed, low and patient. Rope, 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 drop, drop, drop. Hydrogen babbled, as excitable as a squirrel in spring. Emil tied the rope to the bucket's handle and tested it. The old winch creaked but held. He knew from stories that medieval wells were often deeper than one might expect. Some reached 50 feet to access a stable water table. He chewed his lip, thinking of the quirky tidbit he'd overheard once from a travelling mason. Some castle wells supposedly had frogs trained to sing, if the water level dropped dangerously, an early alarm system against siege thirst. Whether true or not, Emil found himself listening for frog song in the pre-dawn hush. None came. He began his descent, hands gripping the damp rope as his feet braced against the well's inner stones. Each rock was slick with dew and centuries of wear. His stomach fluttered, but he kept breathing. After a dozen feet, his boots found a narrow stone ledge that seemed deliberately carved. He froze, heart hammering. His candle stub trembled in his hand, its tiny flame reflecting in the black water below. That's when he saw it, a faint archway partly submerged, leading into a tunnel of shadow. It was precisely like his dream vision, and yet far colder. A drip landed on his neck, and he shivered. "Is that an entrance?" he whispered. "Enter, and we will echo," Hydrogen sang. "Remember, every choice holds weight heavier than water," Oxygen countered, solemn. The historian in him, or the budding one anyway, thrilled at the discovery. Historians still argue whether many castles had water access escape routes, or if these tunnels were rare. Some claim they were purely military legends. Emil, clutching the clammy rope, now had living proof under his fingertips. He swung one leg into the archway, then the other, and crouched along the slippery ledge. How the passage smelled of rust and wet limestone. Every drip became a drum in the hush. He crawled forward until he reached a small chamber no bigger than the alchemy storeroom. Floating in the center was a wooden chest, bobbing gently like it had all the patience in the world. Emil's throat tightened. Could this be the legendary whispering coffer hinted at in the faded marginal notes of the Castle Chronicle? Or just a storage box that someone abandoned during a flood? He leaned closer, touching the water. It was icy and bit at his fingers, sending a shock through his bones. "Don't sit, drop it," Hydrogen urged. "Do not claim too quickly. Patience," Oxygen murmured. He could see the chest's lid was cracked, warped by time. A single rusty hinge hung on like a tooth in an old jaw. He nudged the box toward the ledge with the tip of his boot, creating a ripple that shimmered like mercury in the candlelight. The coffer thudded softly against stone. Emil squatted and ran his hand along the lid, feeling grooves in the wood. Then the flame flickered violently. He sucked in a breath as a cold gust slithered across the chamber, and a low hum rose from the water. It wasn't wind, it was the well itself, resonating, vibrating his bones. He suddenly pictured the hydrogen and oxygen atoms, swirling in joy or alarm. His courage quivered. He decided to retreat for now, memorizing every detail. He pulled himself back to the rope and climbed toward the pale rim of dawn. His arms burned, his heart raced, but the thrill of discovery fed him. When he emerged into the courtyard, fog swirled around him like a congratulatory cloak. Back in the workshop, Emil sprawled on the bench, chest heaving. He imagined the chest waiting for him in its hidden pool, as patient as stone. Tomorrow, he promised himself, he would bring tools, maybe a pry bar or just a strong stick. He drifted into a nap amid the smell of rosemary and the faint croak of a distant frog, already planning the next descent. Sunlight slipped through the high, narrow windows of the alchemy workshop, painting the stone floor in gold-tinged stripes. Emil woke with a stiff neck and the smell of cold ashes in his nose. His dreams had been full of echoing drips and candlelight winking off dark water. He sat up slowly, letting the warmth of morning creep into his bones. The courtyard beyond the doorway hummed with life, a distant rooster clattering buckets, and the faint scent of baked bread curling from the kitchen. Merrick shuffled in, rubbing his eyes with one ink-stained hand and carrying a hunk of cheese in the other. "You look like you spent the night at the bottom of a barrel," he said, his voice still gravelly with sleep. Emil managed a crooked smile. "Almost. I found a ledge and a chest." The master froze mid-bite. "A chest in the well?" "Yes. Submerged chamber, hidden archway, all of it." Emil stood, stretching, and felt his legs complain about the rope-climbing ordeal. "I think it seps what the whispers have been nudging me toward." Merrick sat down heavily, the old wooden chair groaning under his weight. He rubbed his beard, staring at nothing in particular. Historians still argue whether these wells ever held anything beyond water and frogs. Some say the whole notion of secret chambers is romantic nonsense. And yet, he tilted his head at Emil. "You look like a boy who's touched proof." They spent the morning gathering supplies, a stout pry bar, a longer candle, and a sack of dried fruit for energy. Emil also fashioned a crude harness from an old leather belt and rope, something to secure the chest without dropping it into the abyss. He worked in silence, occasionally glancing toward the well, as if expecting the water to wink at him. By midday, clouds had gathered overhead, and the courtyard was shaded and cool. They knelt by the well, and Merrick muttered a blessing in a mixture of Latin and muttered kitchen curses. Emil lowered himself again, muscles remembering the careful rhythm of descent. Grip, brace, breathe. His boots found the ledge, and he ducked into the dripping chamber. The chest was still there, its patience unbroken. Water lapped softly against the wood. He extended the pry bar, wedging it gently under the lid's warped edge. The hinge groaned like an ancient hinge in a fairy tale night, and the lid lifted with surprising ease. A puff of air rose from inside, damp, metallic, and tinged with something sweet like wet parchment. Inside, wrapped in rotting linen, were scrolls and a small metal flask. Emil's hands trembled as he lifted the first scroll. Water streaks blurred some of the ink, but he could still make out looping characters and a faint diagram of concentric circles. The alchemical symbols pranced across the page, familiar yet mysterious. His pulse quickened. "Scroll? Careful, careful, careful," Hydrogen whispered, bouncing syllables like marbles. "Contain memory older than this roof." Oxygen, intoned with gravitas. He eased the scroll into a waterproof oilcloth bag and tucked it into his harness. The flask was heavier than it looked, etched with a crude lion devouring its tail, a likely reference to the Ouroboros, a symbol that had appeared in alchemical texts for centuries. The quirky tidbit he recalled about such flasks: some medieval alchemist supposedly brewed drinking gold, a tonic of dissolved gold leaf in wine, which modern scholars debate the safety of. Emil wondered if this flask once held such a concoction, or something stranger. When he emerged from the well with his treasures, Merrick's eyes widened. By the saints, he reached for the scrolls with a reverence he usually reserved for delicate glassware. Together, they unrolled the least damaged one on the workbench. The page depicted a map of the castle's underbelly, the main well, the hidden chamber, and a line snaking further toward the cliffside. At the line's end was a symbol Emil didn't recognize, an abstract spiral that almost looked like a coiled wave or a sleeping snake. This is remarkable," Merrick whispered. "If this is accurate, there sips another cavity beneath the castle, perhaps even an exit. Historians will bicker over this for decades." He chuckled, then sobered, but some knowledge wants quiet stewardship first. They stored the scrolls in a dry niche, lit an extra candle, and examined the metal flask. Emil twisted its stopper gently. A soft hiss escaped, followed by a faint scent of sulfur and something medicinal. He quickly closed it again, heart pounding. Whatever it is, it's still alive in there, he murmured. Night settled before they realized the hour. Emil stood in the doorway, gazing at the star-pricked sky. The courtyard felt different now, as if the very stones knew he had disturbed a long-kept secret. The whispers rose softly from the well. "Further, further do you dare?" Hydrogen teased. "Wisdom waits, but caution anchors the wise," Oxygen reminded. Emil shivered, a mixture of excitement and unease curling in his belly. He had opened the first door of a story the castle had been writing in silence for centuries. Tomorrow, he knew, the next descent would demand more than rope and courage. It would require listening, really listening to the whispers in water. The castle woke slowly the next morning, as if sharing the secret Emil had unearthed and stretching it through its stones. Soft mist curled over the courtyard, and the well looked almost innocent again, its surface smooth as glass. Emil leaned on the parapet and watched his reflection waver in the dawn light. He could almost imagine the water smirking at him. Behind him, the rhythmic clink of glassware and the creak of the bellows told him Merrick had already begun the day's alchemical experiments. Inside the workshop, a faint herbal tang mingled with the heavier scent of soot and boiled vinegar. Merrick was crouched over a small furnace, a crucible glowing like a miniature sun within. "I've been thinking," the master said without looking up. "That flask may hold some early form of aqua vitae, or less pleasantly, the residue of alchemical gases. Some medieval records speak of capturing the breath of metals in sealed vessels." He shot Emil a sidelong glance. Historians still argue whether those accounts were misunderstood chemistry or just wishful poetry. Emil nodded, still tasting a phantom of sulfur in the back of his throat. It hissed like it wanted out. I think the whispers were listening to it too. By mid-morning, they had prepared for a deeper exploration. Emil adjusted the leather harness, now reinforced with a loop to attach the pry bar. He tucked a waxed torch in a waterproof sheath, and Merrick handed him a small silver charm etched with a fish. "Old superstition," the older man said. "Fishermen wore these against drowning. Might as well keep the tradition alive." They descended again, the familiar rhythm of rope and stone becoming almost meditative. The first chamber felt friendlier now, candlelight glinting off damp walls like the inside of a gemstone. Emil crouched by the ledge and found the narrow passage hinted at on the scroll. It slanted downward, carved from bedrock, with water whispering along its edges. He wriggled forward, boots scraping. The air grew cooler, tinged with minerals, and a faint metallic bite. A drop of water landed on his nose, startlingly cold. In the distance, the whispers rose, clearer than ever. Beyond, Spiral sleeps. Hush, hush. Hydrogen's voice trickled like laughter in bubbles. Deep breath, little seeker. Caution. Weight of history here, Oxygen murmured, slow as tidewater. The passage opened into a second chamber, larger and drier, with an uneven stone floor. Emil's torch revealed fragments of wood, maybe once part of scaffolding or a storage crate, now feathered with mold. A relic in the corner caught his eye, a corroded iron brazier, still clinging to the ghost of charcoal. That mainstream historical fact struck him immediately. Many medieval castles used such underground chambers for temporary storage or even secret watchposts, and some archaeologists believe braziers were left as markers for those rare ventures below. He crouched, brushing dirt from the brazier, and noticed a small carving beneath, a spiral symbol matching the scroll's mysterious endpoint. His pulse jumped. He was exactly where the map had promised, standing on history no one alive had touched. And then he noticed the object in the center of the chamber. A stone pedestal, squat and rough, supported a clay jar sealed with wax. Dust and cobwebs crowned it like a crude diadem. He approached carefully, heart fluttering. His hand hovered over the jar, then withdrew. He thought of the flask upstairs, hissing with its secret breath. Instead of opening it, Emil studied the surroundings. A fringe anecdote he recalled flickered in: some alchemists supposedly used clay vessels filled with special oils to trap starfire, believing the oil captured celestial influence during certain lunar nights. Scholars still debate whether these jars ever held anything except perfumed lamp fuel, but the thought made his fingers itch with curiosity. He finally lifted the jar, its weight surprising, and traced the spiral carved into the pedestal. For a moment he swore the stone felt warm. The whispers pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Careful, careful, careful. Hydrogen chanted in rising pitch. Bring it to light, but do not break faith. Oxygen soothed, words curling like mist. Emil retreated carefully, jar secure in his harness. The crawl back through the passage felt longer, his shoulders brushing slick stone. He emerged into the first chamber, the candlelight now welcoming. As he climbed the rope, his muscles burned, but anticipation pushed him upward. When he emerged, Merrick was waiting, eyes wide at the sight of the sealed jar. They set it on the workbench beside the metal flask and scrolls, a growing constellation of secrets. Emil peeled back a bit of wax, releasing a faint aroma of lavender and something musky, like aged wood. If this is oil, it's survived centuries, Merrick said, or softening his voice, or it's some other concoction entirely. They decided to leave it sealed until they could prepare a proper containment. Instead, they examined the pedestal's spiral carving Emil had sketched. Merrick rubbed his temple. It could signify the cycle of distillation, he mused, or perhaps water currents. Some fringe text connects spirals to breathing wells, claiming the water itself holds memory. Historians call it folklore, but you've heard those voices. Emil felt the day's weight settling into his shoulders, the combination of physical exhaustion and mental buzz. He glanced at the well and swore the water rippled without wind. He could almost imagine it nodding approval or anticipation. As dusk fell, the courtyard bathed in amber light. Emil leaned on the well, whispering softly to the surface. "I found your spiral," he said. "What now?" "Listen, listen longer. Sky and stone will answer." Hydrogen giggled, faint as popping bubbles. "Night comes, dreams will carry next steps." Oxygen sighed, deep and slow. The boy smiled, eyelids heavy. He would sleep with the scent of ancient lavender in his nostrils and the hum of whispered water in his ears, knowing the castle still had more to reveal, if he could balance curiosity with care. Emil awoke to the castle breathing, a long exhale through its empty corridors, and a soft inhale as the morning sun pressed timid light through the narrow windows. He had dreamed of the spiral again, spinning slowly in darkness, and of voices rising from water, chanting in syllables he almost understood. The jar of ancient oil rested on the workbench, gleaming in a patch of pale sunlight, like a treasure that had waited centuries for this exact moment. Merrick sat across from it, already awake, his face drawn in thought. "I didn't sleep much," he admitted, his voice rough with the night. "I kept thinking about this jar. If it truly held ceremonial oil, or even some alchemical essence, it might have been part of an experiment meant to awaken the well itself. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists were strictly chasing metals, or if they were spiritual engineers of a kind." He gestured to the spiral Emil had sketched the day before. Symbols like that keep the debate alive. Emil stretched his shoulders and approached the well. He wanted to hear the whispers clearly in the quiet of early morning. He leaned over the stone rim, the water mirror bright, and waited. A drop of dew slid from his sleeve into the water, sending out perfect ripples. "Awake at last, little feet." Hydrogen's voice fizzed with mischief. "This is a day of patience, and patience feels like rain." Oxygen hummed, slower, weightier. The boy smiled, glancing back at the jar. "What do you want me to do with it?" he whispered. The water whispered back in riddles, which was normal by now. The day became a study in careful preparation. Merrick insisted they reinforce the harness and test the rope for any fraying, though Emil suspected the old alchemist just wanted more time to puzzle over the jar. They collected clay from the riverbank to make fresh seals, prepared a sand bath for gentle heating, and burned sage to clear the workshop's air, a habit Merrick had picked up from a manuscript claiming that the scent tamed the fumes of the planets. Emil found that tidbit amusing. The sage smoke mostly made him sneeze. When the sun reached its peak, they finally decided to open the jar fully. Emil's fingers trembled as he sliced through the wax with a thin heated wire. A puff of fragrant vapor escaped, curling upward like a pale ribbon. It was neither unpleasant nor exactly familiar. A mix of lavender, burnt honey, and something mineral that made the air taste like a distant thunderstorm. Inside, the oil was clear with a faint golden sheen. Merrick dipped the tip of a glass rod into it, then let a drop fall onto a small copper plate. Nothing happened for a heartbeat, and then the drop spread in an odd spiral, as though guided by an invisible hand. Fascinating, Merrick murmured. In historical records, some oils were infused with powdered meteorite or volcanic ash. Scholars debate whether it was symbolic or practical. This behaves almost alive. As the afternoon dimmed into a softer amber light, Emil and Merrick carried the jar and the flask to the well. The castle courtyard was quiet except for a cooing pigeon and the occasional creak of cooling wood. Emil knelt at the rim, holding the jar carefully. "Do we pour it in?" he asked, voice uncertain. Merrick hesitated. "If we do, we risk losing our only sample. But every instinct tells me this oil was meant to commune with water, perhaps just a single drop to see the response." Emil obliged, letting a glimmering bead fall from his fingertip into the well. It hit the surface and bloomed outward in perfect concentric rings. The whispers leapt up immediately, like startled fish. Warm awake the memory stirs, hydrogen fizzed, quick and sharp. Yes, yes, the pact of surface and depth returns. Oxygen murmured in a tone almost like song. Then the well went quiet again, the rings fading into glassy calm. Emil stared into the depth, wondering if he imagined the faint glimmer swirling far below. They withdrew to the workshop as twilight seeped into the sky. The castle took on that half-fantastical feeling of a place hovering between centuries. Emil prepared a small meal of bread and onions while Merrick recorded notes, sketching the jar, the spiral pedestal, and the pattern the oil had formed on copper. "Do you realize," Merrick said between scratches of his quill, "that this castle might have been a node of experimental alchemy? If this spiral truly channels water memory, or if the oil interacts with the underground source, it suggests a purpose beyond simple defense or storage." Historians still argue whether some wells were built as ritual instruments. Emil chewed his bread and thought about the voices. To him, the debate wasn't abstract. The water had personality. It teased and guided and soothed. He found himself wondering how lonely it had been for centuries, whispering only to itself in the dark. That night, when the stars slid into their familiar spots and the wind threaded softly through the courtyard, Emil sat by the well again. He trailed one finger along the rim and hummed. "Good little listener," hydrogen bubbled. The spiral opened slowly. "Sleep near, dream deep," oxygen whispered, as though tucking him into bed. Emil lay back on the stone, the faint warmth of the day lingering there, and let the sounds of night fold around him, the breeze, the creak of timbers, the heartbeat of water far below. Sleep came with the scent of lavender and old stone, and he felt with dreamy certainty that the castle itself approved. The morning that followed broke gently, as though the sun had tiptoed into the sky and decided not to wake anyone too abruptly. Emil stirred on the stone near the well, his cheek pressed against the cool rim. He blinked at the soft halo of light that crowned the courtyard and smelled dew mixed with the faintest echo of lavender from the opened jar. He stretched, the joints in his back popping, and saw Merrick already awake, hunched over his notebook with the intensity of a monk illuminating a manuscript. "You slept outside," Merrick said, not looking up. "Either you're braver than I thought, or that well has you in its pocket." His tone carried a hint of humor, but his eyes, when they finally flicked to Emil, were sharp with curiosity. Emil sat up, brushing dust from his tunic. "They talked to me again. Hydrogen said I was a good listener." He hesitated, aware of how absurd it sounded out loud. "Oxygen, well, it told me to sleep near and dream deep." Merrick exhaled a long, low whistle. "You realize, if anyone outside this castle heard that, we'd either be famous or thrown in a cell. Maybe both." He tapped his quill against his notes. Historians still argue whether medieval wells were ever considered sentient or sacred. I think we've just stepped into the grey space where myth and observation shake hands. They spent the early hours inspecting the courtyard for subtle changes. Emil noticed that the moss around the well appeared fresher, more vividly green, and a faint moisture coated the stones that hadn't been there the day before. When he touched it, the dampness clung to his skin longer than normal water, leaving a faint shimmer in sunlight. Merrick collected a sample in a small vial, holding it up to the light. "This is new," the alchemist said. "Could be condensation from the temperature shift," or he trailed off. And Emil knew the ore was where the excitement lived. A thin smile tugged at the older man's face. Some fringe manuscripts claimed that alchemical waters could absorb and release energy. Most scholars dismissed that as poetic nonsense. But he shook the vial, watching the glint dance. The two of them returned to the workshop and heated the mysterious moisture on a sand bath. Emil leaned in, careful not to inhale deeply. The water bubbled faster than expected, and when a single droplet leapt to the rim of the dish, it left a tiny white residue behind, like frost on a winter window. Merrick poked it with a copper needle. "Crystalline," he murmured. "Possibly mineral salts, but arranged oddly. Historians debate whether alchemists ever managed to grow sip structures this way without modern equipment. This might be one of those legendary cases." By midday, a plan formed between them. They needed to explore the spiral chamber beneath the well again, but not simply to gawk. Emil would descend with the oil and the new crystalline residue to see how the depths reacted. Merrick double-checked the harness, his fingers quick and methodical. "I've repaired the rope and tested the knots twice," he said. "If the castle wants to play games with you, at least we're prepared." Emil felt a nervous thrill as he climbed into the harness. He clutched the small jar of oil in one hand and the capped vial in the other. The pulley groaned softly as Merrick lowered him. The chamber greeted him like an old friend. Cool air, the gentle lap of water and faint luminescence threading the stone spiral. He could see where his previous chalk marks still clung to the wall. "I'm back," he whispered, unsure why he announced it, but unable to resist. "Back, back, back, clever little anchor." Hydrogen's voice bounced in cheerful echo. "He brings memory and liquid and crystal." The old pact breathes. Oxygen's tone rumbled low, vibrating against Emil's ribs. He crouched near the water and dipped the copper plate with a touch of oil. The spiral glow responded immediately, brightening as though something deep below had opened an eye. Emil uncapped the vial and let a fragment of the crystalline residue fall into the water. Tiny bubbles formed, racing in delicate spirals. The whispers rose, overlapping. "Warm rise, old songs again. We remember your feet and the sky above." A sudden pulse rippled through the chamber, sending rings across the water. Emil's heart jumped. He almost imagined he could see the bottom now, a dark mirror rimmed by silver light. Yet it wasn't empty. Something like a stone dais sat submerged, carved with the spiral he'd seen above. "Historians still argue," Emil murmured aloud, "if underground chambers like this were ceremonial or purely practical. But if they could hear this, I think the argument would end pretty quick." He lingered, letting the voices fade into gentle hums. When he finally tugged the rope for ascent, the light dimmed and the water whispered one last thing he couldn't fully catch. Something about surface meeting sky. Back in the courtyard, Emil described everything, every ripple and hum. Merrick's quill scratched furiously, capturing every detail. "If what you saw is accurate," the alchemist said, "then the submerged dais might have been part of an ancient alchemical rite. Some fringe theories suggest medieval engineers tried to align water sources with constellations, as if the liquid could remember starlight. Your vision of silver light, well, is either proof or a very creative mind at work." They ate a simple supper under the slow-bleeding sunset. Emil found himself gazing at the well, feeling it watching back in a companionable way. He wondered what the next night would bring, and whether the voices had more to teach, or were merely waiting for some final ritual to be complete. As darkness settled, he lay again on the stone rim, listening to the distant gurgles. Somewhere between waking and sleep, he thought he heard a new word float up from below. Almost. The following night carried a peculiar electricity, though no storm cloud troubled the sky. Emil could sense it in the stillness of the courtyard. The air hummed faintly, as if every stone of the castle had taken a deep breath and held it. He settled by the well again, his pillow nothing more than a folded cloak, the edge of the rim pressing comfortingly against his shoulder. Merrick, ever the cautious observer, perched on a stool nearby with a lantern in his lap, scribbling intermittent notes. "Tonight feels different," Emil whispered, the words dissolving into the gentle night breeze. "It does," Merrick murmured, his gaze drifting toward the half-moon. Historians still argue whether such perceptions are imagination or the residue of environmental cues, but honestly, I sipped rather trust your instincts at this point than the dustiest scroll in the library. Emil chuckled softly and tilted his head to peer into the well's darkness. His reflection shimmered faintly on the water far below, interrupted occasionally by little ripples that didn't match any breeze. "I think they're waiting for me," he said, and it was half a question. The voices did not immediately appear. Instead, the first sound was a faint plink, as though a droplet had fallen in perfect rhythm. Emil closed his eyes and listened. The drip became a pattern, then a cadence. And finally, in that half-dreaming state, the words formed. "Step lightly, tonight we braid the deep." Hydrogen sang in a bubbly, excited tone. "Bring your pulse, bring your sky breath." Oxygen's voice was deeper, sonorous, vibrating in Emil's chest. "I'm here," Emil whispered. He glanced sideways to ensure Merrick hadn't fallen asleep. The alchemist, however, leaned forward eagerly, eyes sharp and lantern dimmed. Emil climbed into the harness without waiting for the formal discussion they usually had about safety. He felt a strange compulsion, a calling that tugged at his ribs like a gentle current. The pulley creaked as Merrick lowered him, each meter deeper, bringing a cooler kiss of air across his face. The spiral light greeted him with a brighter glow than ever before, and he gasped despite himself. Tonight, the chamber had changed. The water's surface shimmered as though dusted with tiny stars. He realized with a start that he was seeing reflections of the actual night sky through the well opening, perfectly aligned on the surface. "Like an alchemical mirror," he murmured. Some fringe texts claimed water could memorize constellations on specific lunar nights. They laughed at that in my lectures. He stepped carefully onto the narrow ledge and crouched close to the surface. The luminous spirals on the walls seemed to sway, a gentle oscillation matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. "Lower your hand," Hydrogen urged playfully. "Let it taste your warmth." Oxygen resonated, patient and paternal. Emil obeyed, dipping his fingers into the cool water. Instantly, he felt a faint tingling, not painful, but undeniable. The stars on the surface blurred, then reformed, and a faint image appeared beneath them. A carved stone hand, rising from the submerged dais, mirroring his gesture. He blinked in wonder. Historians still argue whether medieval builders integrated moving or reactive sculptures into sacred wells, but if this was mechanical, it was the most graceful engineering he had ever seen. The whispers thickened into a braided melody. Emil could not catch every word, but fragments floated. "Air feeds fire, fire dances on water, and remember the pact beneath the castle bones." He felt a tremor beneath his palm, and then a subtle pressure pushing back, as though the water itself were shaping to his hand. Suddenly, a small bubble broke the surface with a soft pop. Inside it, for the briefest moment, he thought he saw a flicker of an image. The castle as it must have looked centuries ago, banners crisp in the wind, torches illuminating the very courtyard where he now lay at night. It was gone as quickly as it came. Emil's breath caught. He withdrew his hand, water sliding from his fingers like liquid glass. "Merrick, you need to see this," he called upward, his voice echoing along the stone shaft. "I'm not sure the rope can handle us both," Merrick shouted back, though his voice was shaking with barely contained excitement. "Just describe it." Emil hesitated, then continued his work. He uncapped the small vial of crystalline residue they had prepared from the previous night's experiment, and let a single granule drift into the water. It sank slowly, spinning like a tiny comet, and as it reached the hand on the submerged dais, the whispers rose to a sudden crescendo. "Awake, awake, the breath returns." The water surged upward in a gentle fountain, drenching Emil's arm but leaving the ledge dry. When the ripples stilled, a faint spiral symbol glowed just under the surface, as if inviting him to touch again. He resisted, for now, remembering Merrick's rule about one experiment at a time. By the time Emil was pulled back up, The courtyard seemed both familiar and utterly transformed. The air hummed even louder, as though the castle itself now resonated with the whispers of hydrogen and oxygen. Merrick bombarded him with questions, scratching frantically in his notebook. "You're describing something like an encoded ritual. Fringe manuscripts always hinted at the third night of the crescent, but no one knew what it meant." He looked almost giddy. They packed their tools and set a watch to ensure no one else wandered near the well. As Emil lay down again, staring at the soft half-moon, he felt both exhausted and weightless. The voices did not speak again that night, but he could sense their anticipation curling at the edges of sleep, like the prelude to a song he already knew by heart. By the next evening, Emil had developed a peculiar habit of holding his breath before approaching the well, as if some subconscious part of him feared he might inhale a truth he wasn't ready for. The courtyard air had cooled with the onset of autumn, and the fallen leaves scratched softly against the cobblestones with each whisper of wind. Merrick walked beside him, carrying their small wooden box of instruments like a priest with a reliquary. He muttered about safety checks and counterweights, but his eyes gleamed with an excitement that belied his age. Emil sat on the rim, dangling one boot toward the blackness below. He let his fingers drum a soft rhythm against the stone as he peered down. "They sitch quieter tonight," he said. "I can feel them, but it sits like they sitch are holding their breath too." "That's anticipation," Merrick said, lowering the lantern. Its glow cast long, nervous shadows against the walls. Historians still argue whether wells like this were ever used in coronation rituals. Some claim the water's reflection was part of a symbolic marriage between ruler and land. Maybe what you're feeling is the leftover heartbeat of that ceremony. Emil smirked. Or maybe the castle just wants to watch me squirm. He leaned forward, listening for the first hints of sound. When the whispers arrived, they were subtle, less like voices and more like condensation forming in the mind. "Steady, ready the vessel," hydrogen murmured, bright and delicate as chimes. "The air will bow to the stone tonight." Oxygen added, rich and slow. Emil shivered despite himself. He reached for the rope harness, and Merrick double-checked the knots, muttering an alchemical charm for luck. As Emil descended, the faint spiral glow on the walls greeted him again, softer this time, as though conserving energy. He stopped at the ledge just above the water, heart thumping in a rhythm that almost matched the plink-plink of droplets below. The surface had changed once more. This time, it was not stars or mirrored skies, but a faint moving pattern, like the ripples of a school of fish darting beneath the surface. Emil squinted, realizing the motion resolved into shapes, tiny arrows pointing inward toward the center of the well. "Follow, follow," hydrogen whispered. He leaned over carefully, lowering the small bronze cup they had fashioned for drawing samples. The cup trembled in his hands as he let it sink into the water. The moment the surface broke, the whispers rose slightly. "Hold fast, cradle the echo," oxygen intoned. The water in the cup glowed faintly, not with light from above but from within itself. Emil pulled it up to his eye level, entranced. It was cool, but not as cold as he expected, as if carrying a memory of the day's sun. He had read in some obscure manuscript that ancient alchemists believed water stored solar impressions, a notion Merrick once dismissed as poetic nonsense. Yet here he was, staring at a liquid that seemed to pulse faintly with warmth. He lifted it toward the spiral mark on the wall. At that moment, the pattern beneath the water shifted again. Now it displayed the faint outline of the castle's foundations. He could almost trace the hidden passageways Merrick had theorized about. "They're showing me the bones of the castle," Emil whispered. "Describe every line," Merrick called down, his quill scratching furiously. Historians still argue whether these wells were intended as maps for emergency escape routes or sacred diagrams. This could prove both. A sudden surge of bubbles startled him. The cup nearly slipped from his fingers, but he caught it and held it close. He realized the bubbles weren't random. They clustered into a spiral, mimicking the mark on the wall. Hydrogen's voice was like an excited giggle. "Link complete. The breath remembers." Oxygen followed, lower and reverent. "Unlock the listening stone." Emil felt a vibration through the ledge and instinctively pressed his free hand to the wall. The stone beneath his palm hummed like a living creature. A hairline crack widened slightly, revealing a faint trail of mist curling upward. He thought he saw a carved symbol inside, something like an open hand holding a droplet, but it vanished as the mist dissipated. He climbed back up, heart racing. Merrick caught the cup with trembling hands and sniffed it cautiously. No scent, he said, and yet it feels charged, like the air just before lightning strikes. Maybe the castle is breathing through the water, Emil said, flopping onto the cold stones and staring at the night sky. The moon was nearly full now, and for a moment the courtyard felt as if it floated above the earth, detached from all common sense. They stored the cup in the wooden box, wrapping it in soft cloth. Merrick leaned against the well, speaking more to himself than to Emil. There's a fringe theory that such wells acted as natural batteries, holding electrical potential in water exposed to certain mineral formations. They called it dragon's breath. Mainstream scholars rolled their eyes, but if that crack in the stone is a listening mechanism, maybe they weren't entirely wrong. Emil closed his eyes and let the quiet settle in. The whispers had faded completely, but he sensed their promise lingering in his bones. The castle would speak again, and soon. By the following night, the castle seemed to hold its breath alongside Emil and Merrick. Even the wind refused to rattle the shutters as if nature itself wanted to listen in. Emil found himself walking slower through the courtyard, lantern held close to his chest, absorbing every detail of the stones and ivy, as though they were old friends sharing secrets. He had not slept well since the water began to speak, and yet he did not feel tired. Excitement had replaced rest like a stubborn houseguest. The well's rim was slick with dew, reflecting the orange lantern light like a tiny halo. Emil crouched and traced the spiral carved faintly in the stone with his fingertip. "It's like the whole castle's heart is right here," he murmured. Merrick stood behind him with his arms crossed, grumbling half-heartedly. "If the castle had a heart, lad, the tax collectors would have stolen it by now." He leaned over to peer down. Still, historians still argue whether these spirals were decorative or symbolic. Some claim they represented the cosmic breath in medieval alchemy, a way of mapping the soul of stone. Emil began the descent again, the rope creaking in familiar complaint. Tonight, he could sense the whispers arriving before he heard them. They pressed faintly against his thoughts, a tingling at the edge of awareness, like the fizz of champagne in the mind. Deeper still, the current holds memory, hydrogen sang. The vault opens to the careful hand. Oxygen rumbled. When Emil's boots met the narrow ledge above the water, the air felt thicker than usual, heavy with the scent of wet stone, and something faintly metallic, like coins left in the rain. He lowered the lantern and nearly gasped. The water's surface was no longer a mere mirror or a map, it was an eye. A massive, slow-turning iris of reflected light and dark stared up at him. Each blink of the rippling water suggested a consciousness far older than any man. Emil's first instinct was to recoil, but the whispers steadied him. "Do not fear the gaze, it remembers you." He knelt, trembling, and dipped the bronze cup again. The water glowed faintly, but more than that, it vibrated against the metal like a purring cat. He lifted it and felt warmth radiating into his palm. "Merrick," he called, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think it knows I sip in here." The old alchemist Sip's voice echoed from above. "Describe it, lad. Leave nothing out." "It says, looking at me, and it feels alive, like the water isn't set water anymore. Like I set me holding a thought that hasn't set finished thinking itself." From above, Merrick muttered, "Their sep's a fringe account in the Verona Codex that claims wells under castles could store the reflections of every person who drank from them. Scholars dismissed it as a metaphor for memory. But, well, this is something." Emil brought the cup closer to his ear on instinct. At first there was only the soft lap of water, but then the voices returned, quieter, like distant songbirds. "We are the breath you borrow. We are the door you open." The eye below shifted again, its iris contracting into a pinpoint that pulsed in rhythm with Emil's heartbeat. Then, slowly, an image rose within the glow, a spiral staircase descending beneath the well, impossibly deep. He realized with a start that this must be the listening stone Oxygen had mentioned. Perhaps it was not just a metaphor. Perhaps the water was guiding him to a physical space long forgotten. Emil set the cup carefully on the ledge and pressed his hand against the stone wall. He felt warmth now, stronger than before. Tiny vibrations ran through his palm, like a purr magnified through the earth. Suddenly, the stone gave a low groan. A portion of the ledge slid slightly downward, revealing a seam that curved like a secret smile. Mist rose from the gap, cool against Emil's face. He almost called for Merrick, but stopped, letting the moment wash over him. He wanted to feel, not explain. Listen, the water keeps promises older than kings. He returned to the surface carrying the warm cup. Merrick took it with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their age. They both crouched on the cold stones, studying the glow. It seemed to pulse faintly between them, as if aware of their shared curiosity. "This is bigger than alchemy," Merrick whispered. "If this is what I think it is, lad, the castle isn't Tet just sitting on history. It sitting on a memory that breathes." Emil leaned against the well, letting the night soak into his senses. The courtyard, the lantern, the whispering water. It all felt like part of one slow exhale. He imagined the castle as a sleeping giant, and he and Merrick were the tickle in its dream. Before they left, Emil glanced back at the spiral, now damp with mist. He felt a pull to descend further, to follow that hidden stair in the vision. But he also knew the castle would reveal its heart only in patient beats. The next evening carried a suspense that Emil could taste in the air like the faint mineral tang of the well's water. He and Merrick moved through the courtyard in silence, the lantern's glow creating islands of gold amid the grey stone. The wind stirred lazily, making the ivy shiver as though it knew secrets they were about to uncover. Emil gripped the rope ladder with a determination that felt heavier than the lantern in his other hand. He was past the point of curiosity now. What drew him downward was a need, as if part of him had always belonged in the whispering dark. The first thing he noticed upon descending was the air, denser, carrying the smell of wet limestone mixed with something faintly sweet, like honey diluted in rainwater. He paused on the narrow ledge, letting the lantern's light skate across the water. The reflection of the eye had returned, staring up with a familiarity that made his chest ache. He didn't feel afraid. If anything, he felt welcomed, as though a long-forgotten relative had opened the door for him. "Welcome, memory waits for careful feet." Hydrogen's voice chimed, delicate and bell-like. "Step where the stone inhales," Oxygen murmured, a bass that seemed to roll through the walls themselves. The seam Emil had discovered the previous night now gaped wider, just enough for a slender figure to slide through. He set the lantern on the ledge, tied it to the rope with a short cord to steady it, and exhaled slowly. "All right," he whispered to himself. "If this is what you've been asking for, I'm coming." Beyond the seam, a narrow passage sloped downward, its walls wet and uneven. Water trickled along grooves that looked intentionally carved, channels that seemed to guide both liquid and perhaps unwary intruders. Emil brushed his hand along the grooves, noting how some were etched in repeating patterns that reminded him of alchemical sigils. Merrick had once shown him an illuminated manuscript describing the use of spiral designs in old European well houses. Historians still argue whether those spirals were mere decoration or maps of sacred flows of energy. Standing here, Emil felt the latter might be true. The slope ended abruptly at the top of a spiral stair, exactly like the one he had glimpsed in the vision. The steps were narrow and slick, but his soft boots found purchase. As he descended, each footfall echoed as if tapping a hollow drum. A sense of being watched accompanied him, but it was not menacing. Rather, it felt like the castle itself leaned in, listening with interest. Midway down, he paused and held his breath. A subtle humming rose from below, low but rhythmic, like a choir practicing in the deepest chamber of the earth. He couldn't decide whether it was mechanical, magical, or merely geological. Perhaps it was all three. He descended further, his fingers trailing along the moist wall for balance. The spiral stair ended in a cavern whose size shocked him. The lantern's light could not fully reach the edges, but it illuminated a round pool at its center. The water in the pool wasn't still. It rotated in a slow, deliberate circle glowing faintly blue. Around its edge were carvings, more spirals, sunbursts, and symbols of the four classical elements. Emil knelt to inspect one. A pair of fish faced each other, tails curving into a perfect circle. He smiled despite his nerves. "A little nod to Pisces," he muttered. Fringe astrologers would love this. He dipped the tip of his finger into the pool. Instantly, warmth travelled up his arm and the voices swelled. Memory finds its vessel. You are the vessel now. The surface rippled, and images formed. He saw the castle as it must have been centuries ago, with banners flapping and horses clattering across the courtyard. He saw alchemists before him, robed and solemn, lowering cups into this same water. One in particular, a woman with silver hair braided down to her waist, locked eyes with him across the centuries. She mouthed words he could not hear, but he felt them resonate in his bones. Protect this place. Emil withdrew his hand, shaking from awe rather than fear. His pulse felt synchronized with the humming cavern. He looked up toward the darkness and realized the roof of the cavern shimmered faintly, as if coated in moisture that caught unseen light. He realized it wasn't water at all, it was crystal. Entire swathes of the ceiling glittered with quartz-like formations. In medieval Europe, miners sometimes stumbled upon starry caves lined with reflective minerals, and local folklore often tied them to fairy or saintly blessings. Emil now understood how such tales were born. He sat cross-legged at the pool sip's edge, letting the lanterns sit beside him. His reflection in the water was faintly distorted, stretched by the slow spin of the current. He whispered, "So what now? Do I just listen? Listen, remember, share the breath of stone." The water swirled faster. Suddenly, a droplet leaped from the surface, hovering in mid-air before him. It split into two smaller spheres, which spun in orbit for a heartbeat before merging again and dropping silently back into the pool. Emil laughed softly, incredulous. "You really are trying to talk to me in your own language." After a long while, he climbed back up to the ledge where Merrick waited anxiously. His mentor Sip's eyes widened at the sight of Emil Sip's damp, glowing hands. "You went below the ledge, didn't you?" "I found a cavern," Emil said, still breathless. "A pool, a ceiling like stars, and it spoke to me in water and light." Merrick sat heavily against the stone rim, silent for a full minute before speaking. "Lad, I think you Sip just walked into the heart of a living memory, and if the tales are true, water that old keeps its promises. But we must be careful. Some memories change the people who carry them." Emil gazed at the glowing droplet still clinging to his knuckle, a tiny reminder that he now held a piece of the castle's breath. He wasn't afraid of change anymore. If anything, he was ready to become part of the whispering story. The courtyard above was awash in silver moonlight when Emil and Merrick emerged from the well's embrace. Every cobblestone seemed freshly scrubbed by the night air, gleaming faintly as if it had also heard the whispers below. Emil felt lighter, yet anchored in some way, as if threads of water now connected him to every stone of the castle. His boots scuffed softly as he walked, and each sound carried a resonance that felt like the earth was answering back. He followed Merrick to the laboratory, a familiar place suddenly too small for the enormity of what he now carried. The shelves of glass retorts and copper alembics, the faint scent of rosemary smoke and beeswax, all felt like toys next to the cosmic hush of the underground pool. Emil sat at the wooden bench, touching the table, as though to confirm that the world above was still solid. "Tell me," Merrick said, pouring him a small cup of spiced milk. The warmth seeped into Emil's hands as he recounted every detail. The spirals, the crystal ceiling, the hovering droplet, and the woman in the vision with silver hair. He even mimicked the cadence of the voices. Hydrogen's nimble bell, oxygen's rolling bass. Merrick listened with eyes narrowed, the lines of his weathered face softening at the edges. "Historians still argue whether water memory is superstition or subtle science," he said after a thoughtful silence. "What you describe, it is older than alchemy, maybe older than the castle itself. Perhaps the builders only followed the whisper that was already there." He reached for a book Emil had never noticed before, bound in cracked white leather, its title etched with faded gilt. Inside, careful ink drawings showed wells with winding sigils and spiral stairs leading to pools that mirrored stars. Emil touched the illustration and felt a pulse of recognition, like his fingertips knew the page. "It sips the same place," he whispered. "So this wasn't set an accident." Merrick nodded. The ancients called such pools listening wells. They believed certain waters could hold the essence of voices, memories, even intentions. That's why alchemists chased purity, not just of metal, but of story. A drop of true memory could change the path of a kingdom or a single man. The thought lodged itself in Emil's chest. He realized that the droplet which had leapt into the air wasn't just a parlor trick, it had chosen him. He felt simultaneously honored and burdened, as if he had joined an unbroken chain of silent apprentices. He wondered if the silver-haired woman had once stood where he sat, staring at her own damp hands in wonder. That night, sleep came slowly. Emil lay on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling's wooden beams, while the soft nocturnal sounds of the castle floated through the shutters. Distant hooves on stone, the hoot of a barn owl, the whisper of wind sneaking through ivy, and beneath it all, like a soft heartbeat, he still heard the duet of hydrogen and oxygen. Breathe slow, carry the tale, no hurry. It made him smile. The voices had shifted from urgent whisper to lullaby, as though they knew he had finally accepted his role. He thought of the debates he'd read about in dusty texts, scholars arguing over whether alchemists were foolish dreamers or secret scientists. If they could hear this, he mused, maybe they'd finally stop shouting at each other and just listen. The following day, Merrick suggested a final visit to the well together. This time in daylight, sunlight speared down the shaft in soft golden beams, catching droplets that clung to the stone like tiny mirrors. Emil felt the warmth kiss his skin as he leaned over the edge, peering into the water that had once frightened him. It looked perfectly ordinary now, but the ordinary had gained a new dimension. Merrick pressed a hand to his shoulder. Some memories are meant to be carried quietly. Don Set rushed to share everything. But know this, when the castle needs a voice again, it will find you. Emil nodded, watching the sunlight refract into soft rainbows on the rippling surface. He imagined the pool below, still humming, still turning in slow spirals, still waiting for the next gentle question. He felt no need to dive tonight, or even tomorrow. The well was patient, and so, finally, was he. The castle settles into twilight, and the world softens with it. Shadows stretch long and thin, merging into the stone walls until everything feels cradled by a velvet hush. Emil's footsteps fade along the corridor, replaced by the subtle rhythms of night, the sigh of wind through battlements, the trickle of water that never tires, and the steady heartbeat of memory that thrums deep beneath the courtyard. Somewhere below, the listening pool spins in endless patience, reflecting crystals like stars that no sky can claim. The voices of hydrogen and oxygen murmur, softer now, their tones stretching into the slow cadence of a lullaby. They are in no hurry, and neither are you. The air tastes cooler, sweeter, as though it too has been washed in the calm of the well. You can imagine lying back on a smooth stone warmed by the last traces of sun, eyes half closed, letting the whispers curl around your thoughts. They have no sharp edges, no demands. They are only reminders that memory is as gentle as water, and as enduring as the earth it seeps through. Your breath falls into rhythm with the unseen spiral below, slower, softer, steady, as the hum of a quiet fan in the corner of a safe room. If you picture the castle now, you see it from above, a small cluster of stone tucked into rolling hills, the night sky deep and kind overhead. Nothing chases you here. No voices rush you. Even the ancient arguments of elements drift toward harmony, dissolving into the calm flow of water meeting water. And as the story settles into its last ripples, imagine the cool hush of stone walls around you, the soft echo of a distant drip, and the feather-light weight of sleep approaching. Your eyelids grow heavy, the castle breathes, the water keeps its memory, and you, like Emil, are simply part of the gentle whisper now. Sweet dreams.